Locke kind of saw that the state guarantees security. So if there's no freedom and security without the state, so if there are any ideas or beliefs that could potentially threaten the stability of the state, then that's a good reason to limit and prevent people from holding those ideas. And he also mentioned, and you were correct when you mentioned about Mohammedans, right? So he said that Mohammedans don't have a claim for toleration as
I think
well.
I've got the quote here. Actually,
Yeah, if you can read out the exact quote so that people
this
can.
I've got the one for atheism though.
Yeah.
It says here, those are not at all to be tolerated who deny the being of a god, promises, covenants, and oaths, which are the bonds of human society, can have no hold upon an atheist.
Yeah.
Right? He says the taking away of God, though, but even in thought, dissolves all. Besides, also those that by their atheism undermine and destroy all religion can have no pretense of religion whereupon to challenge the privilege of toleration.
Yeah.
So clearly, I mean, this is once again John Locke. He's opposing.
Actually, you know what? I got the I have the quotes here actually.
And this is in I think chapter 20 of his
Yeah.
Tolerations.
Here you go. So he says. I'll try to I'll just talk about the Muslim side of it. So he talks about, he alludes to Catholics,
Right.
and then he says, and this probably sounds like some Islamophobes today, right? He says, it is ridiculous for anyone to profess himself to be a Mohammedan only in his religion, but in everything else, a faithful subject to a Christian magistrate, which is basically his government, right? Whilst at the same time, he acknowledges himself bound to yield a blind obedience to the Mufti of Constantinople, who himself is entirely obedient to the Ottoman Emperor, basically the Caliph, and frames the feigned oracles or hukums of the. He didn't use the word hukum; he says oracles, but it means ahkam of that religion according to his pleasure. And this Mohammedan living amongst Christians would yet more apparently renounce their government if he acknowledged the same person to be head of his church, who is the supreme magistrate in the state. So basically. Muslims can't be trusted because the head of their religion or their leader is the caliph. It isn't the leader of the Christian state they live in.
It's a conflict of interest.
Yes, which is why he argues that it is ridiculous just to think that we should only that a Muslim can only be a Muslim in a spiritual aspect and not in a political aspect too.
Right. So it shows you, I mean, to the extent to which liberalism is malleable from the inside and elastic, if you like, as well from its from the outset. Because obviously here, if toleration can be stretched according to public good and community interest and social interest to this extent, then to what extent is liberalism in fact individualistic in the sense that it claims to be? You know, it's going to be, as we would call it, ijtihadi, right?
Yeah.
I got something from Mill as well. I know we're kind of skipping 200 years.
It's all right.
But this is what I found quite interesting. I mean, I'm not sure, once again, I think I was talking to you about this before, but I'm not sure if this is authentic or not. So I have to put that as a big caveat here before I read this out. But he's talking about blasphemy.
Sure.
And blasphemy laws. And he says, yeah, if such prosecutions be necessary for the well-being of the community, if the prosperity of England requires that some martyrs should be made by the religion for which so many have been made in former times, then, by all means, let them continue and be multiplied, and let Christianity, which benefits the country in so many other ways, also benefit by the sacrifice of its own character for mercy, toleration, and consistency. It is, however, well worth considering whether we will be reduced to this dilemma. So in other words here, I'm not sure, once again, I put this as a caveat, I'm not sure to what extent this is accurate. But what Mill seems to be indicating here as well, once again, we're fast forwarding 150 years or 200 years or whatever it may be, is that there are certain things that societally are unacceptable and therefore should be universalized in law, and those things would then be used to curtail human interaction and liberty, if you like, from an individual. I've got one more example of looking at this, because that could be contested manuscript, right? But in page 166 on Liberty, very famous book, he basically, John Stuart Mill talks about certain acts which are done publicly and not acceptable. And he talks, potentially, like, for example, about like a husband and wife having sex. I'm not sure if he talks about this himself, but I got this from a secondary source material. Maybe a husband and wife having sex in public, right? So this kind of thing, sex in public, is an unacceptable offence according to even, I think, law today. It's public.
Yes, it is.
It's not allowed for a person to just go have
even
sex
though
in
you
the
might
streets.
think it's not by some people's antics we hear about on the news and so on, but no, it's generally prohibited.
It's prohibited, isn't it? So that kind of thing. So if there is something which can be universalized in law and enshrined in law in such a way as would prevent human beings from enacting their kind of individual or doing what they want to do individually, then according to Mill and Locke and all of those theorists, once again, there is a intrinsic malleability, or you can say such a malleability as ironically would allow for rigidity at a certain stage. You can't be free at all stages, because you could argue this doesn't harm anyone. It goes against the harm principle, right?
Yeah.
So two people having sex maybe could harm a child, but if they do it in a certain area, why not?
According to their creed. Yeah.
According to their creed. And so the point I'm making is that there's always, and this is probably a good way to segue into this, there's always going to be that tension between social contract, the universality of law, and the individual self-expression. So this is a problem for liberalism, right? How do human beings sort out these things, especially when you put democracy into the equation? I think I saw you one time on YouTube. I'm not sure if this is correct. You can correct me if I'm wrong. You questioning someone on like, I think it was the Middle Eastern context, and you were talking about politics and, say, for example, let's just be controversial here and let's kind of bring it out, right? I think
me controversial, never.
Let's be controversial. So one of the punitive laws of it is cutting the hand of the thief, for example, say for instance, which is in the Quran. Okay, and we're not saying it's applicable for all times and places. Certainly, we're not saying it's applicable in the United Kingdom, right? For the non-Muslims or whatever it may be, right? Or even for the Muslims. We're not going to say we're going to cut the hands off Judge Judy and executioner, Judge Jury. Not Judy. That's a show.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say was that, say for instance, right, we're bringing the democratic element, right? You have a society which the majority principle dictates, for example, in a referendum, decide that this should be the method by which and through which thieves ought to be punished. Now, you've got lots of tensions here. You've got the tension between the social contract, the majority principle, so-called human rights, individual human rights. Which one should take primacy in the struggle for making it onto law? What should be enshrined and become universal as law?
When people look at hudud and they think, oh, isn't that so barbaric and so on, and
Yes.
they don't look at let's say the history of English law, even during its post-Enlightenment developed stage, let's say 19th century. So
Right.
it wasn't that long ago
Right.
in terms of history.
Victorian Britain.
Yeah, if you committed theft, you could be executed, and killed, and rendered dead just for committing theft. The hudud doesn't do that. Islam doesn't say that. It's much more harsh.
Yes.
Certainly much more harsh. You also had forced labor for many petty crimes.
Yes.
So basically made into slaves.
But they'll say,
at the
look,
state's
we're moved
command.
on now. They'll say, Abdullah, look, we've moved on for that. That was something of the past.
I know, I know, but I would argue they've replaced it with something which is still, I would argue, inhumane compared to the Sharia, the mercy of the Sharia, because the Sharia, the punishment system is it's corporal punishments, so punishment of the body, but the person is released back to their family that very day, right? Their family doesn't suffer when that person's punished. The person who commits the crime, they're punished, not their family. But in Western countries, they put people into these cages, they put humans into cages for long periods of time and have created human zoos. It's become an industry in the United States of America with the highest prison population in the world, more than China.
Wow.
I mean, China's got 1 billion people.
Is that correct? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's the largest prison population in the world.
Well, not as a ratio, as numbers of individuals there.
As numbers.
And we're paying.
I think it's over. I think it's around 1 million or so people. 1 million Americans are in cages.
And what I was going to say to you here, going back to the problems of liberalism, because couldn't one easily argue, right? Just potentially as John Locke did, and potentially as John Stuart Mill, for all his worth, right, would indicate himself that. I mean, this might sound a bit wacky here, right? But let's bring one of the Hadd min Hudud al-Quran wa Sunnah, one of the punitive laws of Islam, right? Say, for example, cutting the hands of the thief.
Or you could even bring, I suppose,
execution, death penalty.
No, the flogging for zina, basically, flogging for committing zina.
Yeah. According to the logic of John Stuart Mill here, in page 166 of his book on liberty, if there are certain things which are unacceptable publicly, so this point here of unacceptable publicly, who's to decide? It would be either or. It would be the population and or the ruler.
Yeah.
So if it's the ruler and the population, so there's kind of like, or the majority principle if they want to bring in democracy, whatever it may be. But if that's the case, so from this logic, you can actually justify using liberal principles, couldn't you? I mean, couldn't you justify cutting the hand of the thief?
Well, they don't really have an argument. Like John Locke, John Stuart Mill, Thomas Hobbes, certainly not Thomas Hobbes either, could not actually produce any argument to actually criticize. They might say it's against our tastes to do so, but they were doing far worse in England around those times, much worse than
colonial empire. I'm not sure what their thing was. I mean, I read it in two treatises of government. There's a lot of discussion on slavery, and obviously there's no doubt.
In the United States, they were amputating the hands of slaves that ran away and so on and so forth. Whereas in the Sharia, you can't amputate slaves and so on and so forth.
No, what I was going to say was that there's no doubt on John Locke's position, for example, on slavery. He was unequivocally against it, right? He talked about, for the most part, from what I remember.
Apparently, there's some reports of him actually having slaves, but in the Americas. But anyway,
but he did write against them, and that's from what I remember. He definitely wrote against it. Slavery is an institution and all that kind of. He definitely wrote against it. He said that human beings should never be enslaved and so on.
To an extent, but he also defended slavery in the Bible by arguing it wasn't slavery. And I think you went to my kind of Islam and slavery lecture when I brought this up.
Yes.
Where he said that if you're not allowed to execute your slave at will, and according to the laws of Moses and what have you, after I think 7 or 6 years, you release them, or they can be released if they pay off a debt or what have you. But basically, you don't have unconditional, absolute control over someone to do whatever you want. And we know that in Islam, you don't. There's prohibitions. Like there are rights that a slave has over you. So according to John Locke, that's not slavery. So Jewish, the kind of slavery as defined in Jewish law, and slavery as they would say is in Sharia, or at least how Sharia manages it. According to John Locke, isn't slavery, and that's what he writes in his two treatises of government. That section on slavery, he writes. He actually mentions it by name, which is something that liberals would find probably disconcerting if they knew that now. And you're right, what you've said about. These guys would not have any criticism of the Sharia. In fact, they could even argue. It could be argued that according to John Locke, an Islamic government under a caliph with implementing Sharia is a free government. It's a free state.
On the basis that he said the same thing about a Jewish government.
No, not even that. He gave a definition. So Robert Filmer argues that. Well, if you believe in freedom, you believe that people can just do whatever they want. And he rebuts in response, saying, no, I didn't say that. What I meant by freedom is that you live under a government with known laws that apply for everybody equally, where the ruler can't do anything he wants to you just because he doesn't like you. So I don't like that hat you're wearing, I'm going to kill you. He can't do that because the law's prohibited, right? Or the laws are defined. So whatever is within the permissible area, the mubah, you have freedom. That's what he means by freedom.